A very good morning to all of you, and I wish you all a happy new year. So, today we are meeting again for a discussion that was left incomplete due to some technical problems few days back. So, we are going to have the same discussion continued here, the discussion on poetry. So, once again, we have with us Professor Dr. Gurunath Badigir, sir. I welcome you, sir, for this lecture
Thank you.
today.
Thank you. Thank
And I express apologies for the technical difficulties that we faced in the last class. Probably since I was traveling, there was some connectivity issue. In spite of having that the Geo5, there was some problem. So I regret for that, sir. But I thank you so much for considering the problem and uh, considering to resume the discussion that
you.
we left in the last class. Thank you so much for that, sir. So without much delay, I request Dr. Gurnath Badigir, sir, to start with his presentation. Sir, over to you.
Yes. A very good morning to all of you. Good morning to Akshay ji and all the viewers on YouTube and aspirants for the post of assistant professors in Department of Collegiate Education. Uh, and today we are back again. I wish you a very happy and contented new year for all of you. And at the same time, I wish 2022 will be something special in your life, and you will find the best job. And wishing you all the success. I come back to my topic, English poetry, where we stopped. Um, Dear friends, we have been talking about English poetry in the past few days and discussed something about the genesis of English poetry in the past, from Chaucer to Houseman. And we wanted to just take a overview of the whole of English poetry. So far we have discussed certain aspects of English poetry already, beginning with Chaucer. We went on talking about the Renaissance poets, the Elizabethan poets, and then we moved on to metaphysical school of poetry, discussed uh, Milton, we discussed Dryden, we discussed Alexander Pope. Then we went on talking about various aspects of uh, 18th century poetry, and later we have some discussion on Thomas Gray, and the very significant poetry of romantic poets. And we have discussed S.T. Coleridge, William Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, Byron, and other poets. We went on talking about Victorian poets. While talking about Victorian poets, I told you that we were actually talking about Lord Tennyson when the network was off. And I was just telling you how Lord Tennyson, who was a poet laureate in Victorian period, contributed greatly to the development of English poetry. Lord Tennyson is something different from that of William Wordsworth. Although Tennyson continued the tradition of romantic poets, Tennyson's poetry is something different from that of William Wordsworth. Because Tennyson lived in the age of science. Tennyson lived in the age when everything was questioned also. So in that way, Tennyson's poetry is not all about digi, joys, and aching raptures, what Wordsworth writes in his famous poem Tintern Abbey. His poetry speaks about the minute objects of nature. The minute observation is also seen in Tennyson's poetry. It's not the nature in general. Each and every leaf has been observed properly because it's a scientific attitude that mattered much in Victorian age. And that's why you see this kind of poetry. So Tennyson, in fact, we also call Victorian age as age of mm, peace and prosperity. Of course, it's not an age of revolution, except Crimean War, and there was no such great war spot. So obviously, Tennyson's nature poems are searching for peace, whereas Wordsworth's poems are searching for joy. That's what he used the word digi, joys and aching raptures. The ecstasy that Wordsworth is speaking about is different. And Lord Tennyson was something special because Lord Tennyson, there is a resemblance of Lord Tennyson with Edmund Spenser also. There is a pictorial quality in Tennyson's poetry. Tennyson wrote all kinds of poems. He wrote ballads, he wrote lyrics, he wrote sonnets, he wrote narrative poems, and dramatic monologues. Two interesting things you have to remember in Tennyson is Ulysses and Lotus Eaters. Ulysses is again a Greek poem. You know that Ulysses is about the Odysseus that we read in the famous epic of Homer. Ulysses is now ruling the country Ithaca, and he is not happy with the ruling. What can I do with an aged wife? I mate and doll. So he wants to go. What can I do? The savage laws and savage people. In Ulysses, we come to know something about scientific temperament. So he goes on searching. He goes out in search of knowledge. He goes in search of. That's why the poem ends to strive, to seek, not to yield. He may be old in age, but not in spirit. That's what he says. I have enjoyed greatly, suffered greatly. I am become a name. It is in this poem he says, uh, not to rust unburnished, but to shine in years. It's a great poem in which Tennyson speaks about the spiritual mind. You may be chronologically old, but spiritually very strong. That's the spirit we can see in Ulysses. He's 80 years old, but he still wants to. He calls the mariners, come mariners. We may be old in age. That's the spirit you can see. The same poet has written one more poem, Lotus Eaters. In Lotus Eaters, there is argument in favor of rest. There is argument in favor of sleep. Everything has a sleep, everything has a rest. Why not we, the crown of all creations? The same Ulysses asked the mariners to continue the journey because they have lost their way. But the Lotus Eaters, they said, in the Lotus Island, they said, we are so happy here, everything is cool. When sun takes rest, moon takes rest, why not we, the crown of all creations? There is an argument, a fine argument about sometimes, there is an argument that death ends everything, sleep is all. So that's quite interesting to see two poems written by the same poet. Tennyson writing in favor of search, in favor of unending journey, in favor of indomitable spirit. But at the same time, in the other poem, like Lotus Eaters, the poet is speaking in favor of the rest. Rest is all. So that is one thing. And one more thing we should remember about Lord Tennyson is his famous elegy in memoriam, ring out the wild bells, ring in the new. And so, how we have to forget all the forgettable, and how we have to welcome the best. And that is a famous elegy written on the death of his best friend, Arthur Hallam. That's what I told you, one of the best pastoral elegies in English, because other pastoral elegies include Milton's Lycidas, Shelley's Adonais on the death of John Keats, and Tennyson's In Memoriam and Honors Thyreses. So, his other poems, Luxley Hall, reflects the timeless spirit of young England and faith. And he also wrote Idylls of the King, and it's a medieval poem. And then his famous lyrics are Break, 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 Tears, Idle Tears, Crossing the Bar. And one of the best ballads is Lady of the Charlotte, and that's why Tennyson is always remembered as one of the best poets of Victorian age. As you know, he is the representative poet. Coming to Robert Browning was famous for writing dramatic monologues. Browning was unaffected by the tensions of Victorian age, because whenever we are talking about Victorian age, we talk about age of compromise and conflict. We talk about the tension between religion and science. We talk about social unrest. But when it comes to Robert Browning is totally detached from all these tensions. He was a great romantic. He wrote wonderful poems, particularly dramatic monologues, dramatic lyrics, romances, and men and women, dramatic persona. Some of his famous poems are My Last Ride Together, My Last Duchess, Rabbi Ben Ezra. So these are some of the best poems that we can see from Robert Browning. Moving on, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, his wife, in fact, produced wonderful lyrical poetry. It was a great love story, and mm, and after she married Browning, she wrote wonderful poems. One of the best poems is How Do I Love Thee? How Do I Love Thee? Sonnets from Portuguese and Aurora Leigh are other poems of Elizabeth Browning. Thomas Hardy is included as one of the great poets. Of course, Hardy began to write poetry during the last part of his life, because we in fact study Hardy as one of the transitional poets. We also include Hardy as a modern poet. So in that case, Hardy is a 19th century novelist and 20th century poet. So that's why we all need to understand the importance of Hardy. Hardy's novels we already know, the famous tragic novels like Mayor of Casterbridge, Jude the Obscure, you know, Tales of the Arborvillage, Return of the Native. And Hardy is also famous for regional novel, particularly Wessex novels. And in that way, Hardy's poems are also called Wessex poems, because Wessex includes various places like Bath, Casterbridge, Arborvillage. Uh, you know, in these poems, again, he writes about man and woman relationship, particularly extramarital relationship. And that's why Hardy's poems are very, very serious poems sometimes. His famous collections like The Past and Present, The Nine Hours, Time's Laughing Stocks, Satires of Circumstances. In fact, his poetry is known for its sweetness, humanity. Of course, pessimism runs in his poetry too, like in his novels. And as far as the background is concerned, Wessex forms the great background to his poetry too. His famous poems are The Duel, uh, Channel Firing, darkling thrush, all to be remembered. As far as Gerald Manley Hopkins or GM Hopkins is concerned, Hopkins is considered as both British and American poet of 1920s. Hopkins was a very different kind of a man. He never used to preserve his poems. It is said that he was writing and either tearing them off or burning them. Some of the he was a clergyman. Some of the poems that remained and were published in 20th century. That's why most of the time we include Gerald Manley Hopkins as a modern poet, not because he was born and brought up in modern age, but he was born and died in 19th century. But his poetic style was very much modern. That way, he is the man who invented sprung rhythm. And the sprung rhythm is something special, kind of effect using more consonants in a poetic line, and that is called sprung rhythm. As a clergy, of course, he wrote about the wreck of the Deuceland, which commemorates the death of shipwreck of 5 Franciscans nuns, and he also wrote poems depicting the glory of God. Windover is one of the best poems, and he should be remembered for use of sprung rhythm. Moving on, we should remember some poets like W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Dylan Thomas, Sylvia Plath. I'll be discussing some important poets here. I may not be discussing the whole lot of poets of 20th century. W.B. Yeats should be remembered for his contribution to British poetry. He's an Irishman, of course. Yeats is known for, William Butler Yeats is known for his two important types of poems. One for his Irish poems, because he never reconciled himself to English habits and the way of thinking. He remained Irish although he lived in London. He was a great visionary and famous for his Irish poems. Uh, he was very much influenced by two important incidents in Irish history. That is Easter 1916, the Great Rebellion by the Irish. And another, he wrote one more poem, September 1913. And another important aspect in Yeats's poetry is the influence of Maud Gonne, his failure in love. That's why some of the poems deal with his. So in that way, we consider Yeats and Keats um, as something similar. Yeats has the same problem. Yeats wrote Greek poems. Keats also wrote Greek poems. In that way, there are certain similarities. Both are romantics. Both used symbols. You know, he's a great symbolist. Yeats is a great symbolist. So he was also responsible for revival of drama in Ireland. That's why he is one of the reasons for Irish theatre movement too. And later we read W.B. Yeats as the playwright of poetic drama. Poetic drama. So, as far as Greek poems are concerned, of course, sailing to Byzantium poems are very Leda and the Swan. Leda and the Swan. Sailing to Byzantium is about the great mosaics that we see in Byzantium city, and that was a part of a Roman Empire, and he writes about this is not the country for the old man, for the young in one another's arms. It is in this poem he speaks about the permanence of art, like Ode on Gracie and Urn, which Keats wrote. Similarly, Sailing to Byzantium and Byzantium speaks about permanence of art, whereas temporal life of man is also discussed here. And some of the personal poems, Prayer for My Daughter, it is about his the birth of Anne Butler. He eats, uh, so he dreams of what kind of daughter his daughter should become, and that is his dream. It is in this poem he speaks about uh, the crazy salad. The beauty should not, fade her knowledge or wisdom, and her daughter should not be all the time caring for beauty. There is an indirect reference to Morgan. He was disappointed in love. And the same poem, we have No Second Try. In No Second Try, he speaks about um, how, because of Helen, the whole Troy was burnt. And similarly, that kind of a thing is echoed by Dr. Faustus in Marlowe's poetry. I would rather ready to burn another Wittenberg for the kiss of Helen. But Yeats says, no second try. There should not be any second try here, and we don't want to burn any city for the sake of a lady. Easter 1916 is an Irish poem about the Easter rebellion that took place in 1916, and it was, of course, put down by British forces. But the spirit of rebellion was necessary for the Irish because there is some revolutionary blood in them. That's why they should come out with a movement. The Second Coming is a very important poem about. It's a commentary on 20th century. It is in this poem he speaks about the best lack conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity. He is dreaming of the world will change after 2000 years. The cycle of change. 2000 years ago, Jesus Christ was born. Before that, there's something happened. So there is a second coming. He speaks about the Sphinx or the, the lion with the woman body moving towards Bethlehem to be born. The idea of the Sphinx is also discussed here. It is in this poem he speaks about how the world is changing fast and how there is need for change. That second coming is a wonderful poem. Circus Animals Dissertation is a swan song of Yeats, and Leda and the Swan is one of the best sonnets written by W.B. Yeats. It is about Leda and how Zeus came in the form of a swan and raped her, and how, because of this, she laid two eggs from which Helen and Clytemnestra were born. That is a wonderful poem written by W.B. Yeats. So it should be remembered for use of symbolism, for use of lyrical poetry, and for all the Irish and Greek poems. Coming to T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is the representative poet of modern age. It's an age of Eliot, in fact, when we call Victorian age of Tennyson. Modern poetry is dominated by uh, Thomas Sterne Eliot. Again, one of the most towering personality in poetry. As a critic, he made a name. As a poetic playwright, he wrote wonderful poetic plays. So T.S. Eliot has affected the very trend of modern poetry. You know, that's why his poetry is called heap of broken images. He was very much influenced by Ezra Pound and the Imagist movement also. But Eliot himself is a big uh, model for all the modern poets because he thinks, although he says tradition is very, very important, he has created uh, new poetry in 20th century. Eliot is remembered for not only remembered for his famous epic poem The Wasteland, but also known for some of his dramatic monologues and wonderful poems. Yeats's The Love Song of Alfred Prufrock is a representative poem. It's a dramatic monologue. Um, Prufrock represents modern man. Says now the poem begins with a wonderful statement. Uh, let's go, you and I. Prufrock is, in fact, speaking to himself, speaking about his indecision, procrastination. Sometimes he says, I am Hamlet, I am not Hamlet. Compares himself to Lazarus. Prufrock's indecisiveness, unable to make love. Ladies are coming and going, talking of Michelangelo. He goes to a party but not able to express himself. My head is bald, my pant is rolled, I am getting old. So he's very much representing the modern man, psychologically disturbed. And some of his other poems are Journey of the Mazai, uh, To the Indians Who Died in Africa. But the best of the poems, or the most discussed poem, is The Wasteland. The Wasteland, in this poem is called, it is made very complicated because of hard editing by Ezra Pound, and the whole wasteland is divided into five parts. It may be death by water, you know, fire, sermon, burial of the dead. Okay, so game of chess. He made lot of references, and the poem is known for various allusions. Even he quoted from Bhagavad Gita, he quoted from Buddhism, he quoted from German, he quoted from variety of sources. And this poem, speaks about the sterility of the civilization and man and woman relationship. That is that holds mirror to a modern society. In that way, T.S. Eliot is a poet who could catch the modern sentiment in his poetry. Moving on, I just want to talk something about W.H. Auden. W.H. Auden was a leader of Oxford movement. We talk about Oxford movement in 20th century. There was a group of poets who were influenced by Marxist ideology, and they were very much influenced by what and earlier Auden was very much in support of Marxist ideology, but later he got disappointed, and he wrote poems like Unknown Citizen. Indirectly, he satirizes totalitarian governments or what we call the very dictatorial government should not exist, because man becomes unknown. Man becomes unknown. The identity of man is lost. So there were poets like Dylan Thomas, Louis Macanese, along with him. But Auden is very famous for his poems like The Orators, The Shield of Achilles, Homage to Clio, and he wrote in memory of W.B. Yeats. That is another important poem of W.H. Auden. Okay, moving on, we are talking about Derek Walcott, Wole Soyinka, Gabriel Okara, Sina Sanai, who was given Nobel Prize, Sylvia Plath, who is famous for a poem like Daddy, or Gabriel Okara's poem Once Upon a Time. He says, Once upon a time, my son We used to laugh with the hearts. Today we are laughing with the teeth. Once upon a time, my son, we used to shake hands with the hearts. Today we are shaking hands with the hands, and other hand is searching. So he speaks about loss of tradition. That is one thing you can see in a Nigerian poet like Gabriel Okara. So apart from that, we have the great Commonwealth poets like Derek Walcott, Wale Soyinka, speaking about the importance of uh, the land, importance of the culture, that's particularly Caribbean consciousness. Australian poets wrote about the Australian consciousness. African poets wrote about the significance of the culture. There is a poetry, particularly we call it post-colonial poetry. In the post-colonial poetry, we come to know that there is a search for identity, search for rewriting the history. There is an urge also for this kind of rewriting. That's what we call rewriting the narratives, rewriting the culture. There was a need for this kind of writing, and most of them have expressed this kind of anguish over the colonial mindset, and they wrote about what is exactly necessary for these countries. So the group of writers and women writers begin to write about uh, feminine point of view, and that's what we call WL, women's language. There is a need for equality, and there is a voice against disparity, gender discrimination. So these things we find in the later poetry, particularly poetry after 1950s. We have a different kind of writing. So that is something about poetry, I can say. And as per the request of our participants, I am talking about some metrical terms today, and later we will go for a question answer. Some of the participants asked questions about metrical notes. Of course, we talk about figures of speech, and later we talk about metrical notes. We all know what a simile is. Simile, the comparison in simile, the tenor and the vehicle. My love is like red, red rose. He is like a lion, like as simile, no problem. Metaphor is an implied simile. I am a lion. Okay, it can be metaphor. I am like a lion is a simile. Okay, personification, personification when the non-living objects are made to speak in poetry. If death is speaking, if the bird is speaking, or if something, the river is speaking in case of Tennyson. For men may come and men may go, I go on forever. 100 bridges, 100 hills, passing down the hills. For men may come and men may go, I go on forever. The brook speaking, mountain and speaking. That is personification. So let us, hyperbole is one more, figures of speech in which something exaggeration take place. Let us understand something about metrics. Meter plays a very important role because we are using the words like iambic pentameter. What is iamb is a big question. That's why people have been asking about what is this metrics. So, yeah, whenever we are talking about poetry, poetry is all about music, poetry is all about metrics, poetry is all about, meaning, poetry is all about symbols, images. So, in terms of metrics, because whenever we are talking about certain poems, What is the meter used? What is the rhythmic pattern, rhyme scheme? Whenever I say ballad, I say rhyme scheme is A B A B. Whenever I talk about rhyme scheme of Shakespearean sonnet, we say that A B A B C D C D E F E F G G. And whenever we are describing a sonnet, we say that sonnet is written in iambic pentameter. What is this iambic? Is another question. Let us discuss a little about the metrics here. All rhythmical effects in poetry in English is a matter of accent and panses, end stops, run on lines. So, accent, that's why, and reinforcement also. We require knowledge of phonetics while studying metrics too, because where it rises, where it falls, we should know the stress pattern, we should know the intonation patterns too, and we should know where the particular consonant becomes silent. So, to understand the rhyme, to understand the meter, we require knowledge of phonetics. Okay, even if you don't have knowledge of phonetics, at least we should have been listening to the English accent, the best English accent, so that we can identify. What is meter? Is the question here. Meter is the recurrence in a regular units or of a prominent pitcher in the sequence of speech sounds of a language. Meter is a very, very important aspect. Say, when I say a thing of beauty is a joy forever, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. There is a regular, a recurrence of particular feet, recurrence. Say, particular foot. Coming to the foot, it's a combination of strong stress and associated weak stress or stresses. A thing, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Coming to uh, one example here, a thing of beauty, is unstressed, thing, stressed, of, unstressed, bew, stressed, unstressed, stress, unstressed, stressed. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. So here, when you see, it becomes iamb. Iamb or iamb is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. An unstressed syllable. That's what every sonnet begins with, this kind of a iambic pentameter only. Iamb, that's what I told you, unstressed syllable followed by stressed syllable. The best example is a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Similarly, all blank verse is also written in this iambic pentameter only. Blank verse, unrhymed iambic penta. Penta means 5 feet. Penta. If it is a single feet, monometer. 2 feet, dimeter. 3 feet, trimeter. 4 feet, tetrameter. 5 feet, pentameter. 6 feet, hexameter. Okay. You take any sonnet. When I consider how my life is spent. This is a famous line in Milton's On His Blindness. When is unstressed. When I stress, consider. Is unstressed. Consider, that is stress. How my life is spent. Similarly, true love is marriage of two minds. The famous sonnet 116. Read any sonnet. It shows you what how particularly iambic pentameter is used. Iamb means unstressed followed by stressed. In case of anapist, two unstressed syllables are followed by a stressed syllable. Two unstressed syllable followed by stressed syllable. That is, there we find so many such examples for anapist. But trochee is trochee is something that is opposite to yam. Trochee is opposite to yam. A stressed syllable is followed by unstressed syllable. If I say, there they are, my 50 men and women. There they are, my 50 men and women. There they are, my 50 men and women. This is written in Trochee. There begins with stress. There. They are. They are. They is unstressed. Are is stressed here. My unstressed. 50. Fifth is stressed. 50. So, this is the finest example of trochaic. This is what we call scansion in English. How to scan. Into is unstressed, or bar is, or a slant bar is stressed over a particular thing. We have some occasional things also. Dactylic. A stressed syllable is followed by two unstressed syllable. A stressed syllable is followed by two unstressed. Eve with her basket was. Eve with her basket was. Eve stressed with her unstressed. Basket stressed. Kit was unstressed. Deep in the bells and grass. Deep in the bells and grass. This is dactylic meter. Demeter actually. There are 2 feet used in this. Spondy is there. Spondy is occasional feet. That is 2 stressed syllables appear. But throughout the line you don't find spondy. In 1 or 2 feet you find this kind of a spondy. Both are stressed here. Good, strong, thick, stupefying, incense smoke. Good, strong, good, stress, strong, stress, thick, stupefying. Of course, here you get 2 feet of spondy, 2 stress. Good, strong. You don't say good, strong. Good, strong, thick, stupefying, incense smoke. This is occasional stress, and at the same time, you have one more occasional stress, that is Pyrrhic. Okay, Pyrrhic. Okay, there's some problem. Pyrrhic is too unstressed civil. Even in Spondy, we remember famous lines from King Lear. Never, 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 never is well. And we remember, sorry, where did we go? Yes. yes, that is. Here, Spondy, my way is to begin with the beginning. My way is to begin with the beginning. That is another important example where two unstressed syllables appear together. This is occasional fit. My way, we don't say my way. My way is to begin with the beginning. So we can understand what is a metric line is named according to number of feet comprising it. Monometer 1 foot, dimeter 2 feet, trimeter 3 feet, 4 feet tetrameter, 5 feet pentameter, 6 feet hexameter. So how to approach a poem, I'm not going to discuss right now because we have been talking about uh, various aspects of poetry, and this is the whole discussion so far on various aspects of English poetry. And major poets have been discussed in the last three sessions. And hope uh, we have an idea. I have already made it very clear to you. Teaching all the poets in such a short time is an impossible task. We are talking about the poets, we are talking about important poems. Even in spite of that, it has been a general talk on the whole of English poetry. We were not able to cover poets in detail. We were able to talk about the poets from the point of view of examination. But what you are supposed to do is to again search for some important aspects of a particular poet. A poet might have set a trend. The poet may be a pioneer of some genre. A poet may be known for special metrical effects. A poet may be known for certain focuses. And obviously, the whole reading should aim at understanding poets and poetry. So with this, I'm going to close discussion on the very English poetry, the topic unit number 2. I think we have been able to discuss some poets in general, and this session will be open for discussion for 10 minutes so that we can have open discussion on these aspects, which will lead to further understanding of the topic. I thank you all for patient listening. Now the session is open for discussion. I request Akshay to open chat box so that the candidates may ask questions in their chat boxes.
Yes, sir. So that was a good session, sir. Especially your discussion on metrics and various types of meters, because in most of our regular classes, it is not taught. Even the, we are not taught in our traditional classes regarding rhyme scheme and all. So it was a very important system, I feel. And as I was listening to your lecture, I felt I was able to listen to Sadhguru. Your voice and your intonation is like that, sir. Like he's
Sadhguru
so.
is Sadhguru.
Even your presentation was like that in a calm, flowing manner. Yes, sir. So we have some questions here. Somebody has also said Happy Yella Amavasya.
I wish. Yes, in some places of Karnataka, Elamasi is a very big festival.
Yeah,
Rather, they celebrate.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, Geeta N has a question. If possible, give chance to Chaitra madam to do class on the novel. Yes, Geeta. The other day, Chaitra madam was also not feeling well, so she has discussed a few things on fiction. Definitely, she will be given one more class. So in that, she can discuss on novel. Sir, there is one question from Sunita NM. What is the main theme of Lida and Swan? Why Zeus went on disguised?
Actually, what is the main theme of Leda and the Swan? Actually, in the Leda and the Swan, it's a poem about god Zeus and
Greek
Zeus.
mythology.
In fact, it has a Greek theme. Uh, I can't explain why GS went in the form of a swan there, but the swan, the power and glory of the swan is described in this particular poem, Leda and the Swan, and she became helpless. Leda was raped, and the union of human beings and the god is quite interesting and common in the Greek mythology. And this union, the power and glory, and the particularly the forceful union, it's called rape, it brought about destruction of many things. That's what she says. And the Agamemnon dead. Clytemnestra is known for the death of Agamemnon, and at the same time, Helen is known for destructive. She married Menelaus, but uh, she was taken to Troy. The whole Troy was burnt because of Helen. So Leda lays two eggs, and out of two eggs, it is said that two daughters were born. One Clytemnestra, another Helen. So that is the story, and why Jesus came in the form of a swan. And there may be some reason in the Greek mythology. I haven't studied that, couldn't focus much.
Okay, sir. And here is one more question from Vasant Kumar. What are the features of modern poetry?
Modern poetry, of course, whenever we are talking about modern British poetry, there are a variety of trends in modern poetry. We can't specify a particular feature. When we talk about 20th century poetry, we speak about transitional poetry who were following the Victorian tradition at the same time modern tradition. When we talk about Georgian poets who wrote romantic poetry, they wrote between 1912 to 1922. Georgian poetry was a volume like W.H. Davis and all. And we have a war poets who begin to write about the frustration, futility of war. People like Siegfried Sassoon, Owen, and Shirley writing about the boredom and the dangers created by war. And then we have poets like W.H. Auden and company, who were influenced by the Marxist movement or Marxist ideology. Later, they also opposed the very idea of totalitarian government. And we have poets like G.M. Hopkins writing differently, W.B. Yeats writing in a different way. W.B. Yeats writes romantic poetry, whereas G.M. Hopkins writes religious poetry. T.S. Eliot wrote particularly the psychological poems like Prufrock and Wasteland. And when you go on studying, there has been a change for every 10 to 15 years. The trend has been changing. We don't see a particular trend like romantic moment or Victorian moment or classical moment that we see in 18th century and the remaining moments. So modern poetry, particularly postmodern poetry, is totally different. We are using blank verse, we are using free verse liber we call it. And there is no even in Indian poetry, you see Ramanujan's poetry is something different from the poetry of Jayant Mahapatra or Arun Kolatkar. So, one important thing is that the modern poets begin to take liberty from all the established norms, and they did not mind much about the traditional metrical system. Okay, Some poets have followed, they wanted to bring in musicality in it. We see different trends in modern poetry. Since it is contemporary poetry, fixing them in the history is rather very, very difficult. Still, a lot of research is going on in this. Whatever I have spoken so far is all about the poetry that up to 1960s. We stop at David Duchess, we stop at Crompton Rickett. We have not spoken much about the contemporary poets, except the Commonwealth poets uh, that was in discussion.
Yeah, right. Is it compulsory to use metrics while writing poems? As
Metrics.
Sir just said in the last question itself, uh, poetry forms of poetry are changing. People use free verse today, so uh, it may not be compulsory, but definitely there will be some meter that will be naturally followed. What do you have to say about this, sir?
Obviously, it is left to individual poet. Even today, we have poetry which is musical. If we have, so we talk about Adiga, we talk about Bendre, we talk about Kuvempu, we talk about various poets also. There are some poets who have been writing, that's why the poem can be sung. Poem is a musical composition. For them, poem is a musical composition. Whereas for some poets, it is the question of thoughts, which are in fact full of images, full of complex images sometimes. Sometimes that's what I was talking about, a heap of broken images. They try to make poetry rather, thought uh, filled, or what you say, more for thoughts, less for music. So, whatever idiom or whatever medium the poet uses is all individual issue. But we have combination of both the poets. And normally what happens, when you are young and what poet says, you are a lover and a romantic, you write poetry which is rather musical. And we have witnessed in many poets during their younger days they wrote musical poetry, and when they grow they become a wise man, serious, the fifth stage, you thoughts become more important than the words. Okay, same happened in case of William Shakespeare too. Is
In
that all
all the
poems written in those days are rhythmic and musical? Obviously, it happened up to 19th century. If you look at many poets, they have followed certain trends only. Either there is classicism or romanticism. For all poetry, there was some kind of metrical similarity. You can see either they have used blank verse or they have used pentameter. Even when it is a lyrical poetry, there is a musicality. If you say daffodils, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats over high vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils fluttering and dancing, beside the lake and beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So Wordsworth used metrics, Tennyson used break, 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 you know. Tennyson used metrics, Browning used metrics. We hardly see, but that was a trend in 20th century poets, particularly in the beginning with Eliot. Eliot has, that's what I told you, Eliot affected the English poetry in that way. So, in modern age, we see this kind of horse liver is invented very late and begin to use it. Earlier, when you read Shakespeare's drama, yeah, all written in blank verse, Marlowe's blank verse. Prose drama is dominant in 20th century, and some restoration poets.
yes,
I think
there is one last question.
the
It's
last.
about the last session, the last class we had. How neoclassical poets convey their ideas to common people through satire.
Obviously, neoclassical poetry was meant for, in fact, satirizing the whims and fancies of aristocratic society. When we look into 18th century poetry, it is urban poetry. It is artificial. It is more about London life, more about the aristocratic society, and represented by poets like Alexander Pope, Dr. Johnson, Goldsmith, a variety of poets who wrote during this time. Their intention was to satirize, mock at uh, the superficial society that existed during this time. Whether it is rape of the lock, when you talk about rape of the lock, the family of Belinda and Lord Peter, how they spend their time in party making, gaming, and indoor games, and how indoor game itself is considered as a great battle like Kurukshetra or Trojan War. So magnifying the trivial and the silly becomes very, very important for the aristocratic or the upper class society. And it is through this they wanted to teach. Whether much of it happened in prose only, whether it's Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels or Battle of Books or Addison and Steele. They highlighted the very whims and fancies of a upper class society. And poetry was, whether the epistle to Arbuthnot, variety of poems of Pope particularly are a very direct satire on 18th century aristocratic society. This is how I feel.
Uh, so yes, sir. We the questions are over. So it was a nice session, sir.
Thank
With elaborate discussion on poetry. Some things were left in the last class, but with today's class, we were able to complete them once again. So, dear listeners, that's all for today's class, and we shall be meeting Badigir sir once again, maybe tomorrow, uh, for the discussion on the fourth unit, that is language,
you.
and
Yes,
the
yes.
basic concepts of language, linguistics, and all. So, sir will be dealing with that syllabus. I will let you know the timings tomorrow. Sir, thank you very much for sparing your
Thank you.
time and giving precious knowledge on poetry. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening.
Yes. So, dear listeners, that's all for today. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.